Felipe and Letizia. A love story written by Barron Darby. Narration by Jessica Ann Bogart. Prologue. If you have come to this book already knowing them, you know the photograph. A young woman in a white coat on a gray Galician shore, a microphone in her hand, the wind doing what it wants with her hair, and somewhere off to the side a tall man who is not supposed to be looking at her the way he is looking at her. You know the wedding that drowned in rain, and then, at the last possible moment, did not. You know the two girls. You know the day a father handed his son a crown, and the son took it the way you take a heavy box from someone whose arms have started to shake. And if you have come to this book, never having heard either of their names, welcome. You have not missed anything you cannot catch up on in the next 2 hours. Here is all you need to carry in with you. He was a prince, raised to be a king, and he had spent his whole life being looked at by a country that had decided certain things about him before he was old enough to disagree. She was a journalist, the daughter of a newspaper man and a nurse, a woman from the north of Spain who had stood at the edge of an oil spill and the rubble of a fallen tower and reported what she saw in a clear, plain voice that millions of people trusted at 9 o'clock every night. She had been married before. She had a whole life already, a real one, with its own furniture in it. This is the story of what happened when the most watched man in Spain fell in love with a woman whose entire profession was watching and saying out loud the truth of what she saw. A note on how this book was made. It is built from the public record, from interviews and broadcasts, and the long memory of a country that has followed these two people for more than 20 years. The things they said in public, they said. The things this book imagines are the quiet things, the kitchen table things, the things no camera was in the room for. Those have been dramatized with care and with respect, and nothing cruel, nothing scandalous, nothing private to their children has been invented to fill a silence. Where the record went quiet, this book lowered its voice too. Now, let her speak first. She would want it that way. There is a sentence she said once, early, before any of it, that the whole country decided to keep. It was a cold afternoon in the gardens of a palace, the kind of November light that makes everything look like it is remembering itself. She was standing beside him in front of a wall of cameras, newly and impossibly engaged to the heir of the Spanish throne, and a reporter asked her a question about how she would manage the enormous change coming to her life. She began to answer. She was good at answering. It was, after all, the thing she had done for a living, the thing she was better at than almost anyone in the room full of people who did it for a living too. And he, beside her, a man who had been raised to fill silences, because that is part of what the job is, leaned in to help, to add something, to carry a little of the weight of the moment for her, the way he had been taught. She turned her head, just slightly, and she said in front of the cameras and the country and the man she was about to marry and the institution she was about to join and the centuries of protocol standing invisibly behind all of it. Let me speak. Déjame hablar. The journalists laughed. He laughed too after a beat. The laugh of a man who has just understood something true and a little inconvenient about the rest of his life. And the country, watching, understood the same thing he did, which was that this woman was not going to be absorbed. She was not going to be folded quietly into the long white history of palace wives who learned to say nothing graciously. She had a voice. She had used it for a living, and she was bringing it with her. This is the story of the man who heard a woman say, "Let me speak," and instead of being threatened by it, spent the next 20 years building a life with her in which she always could. Part 1. Before. Chapter 1. Letizia, the woman who told the news. The first thing you should know about me is that I am from the north, and the north of Spain is not the Spain of the postcards. We do not have the dry gold light and the orange trees. We have green hills that fall into a cold gray sea, and rain that arrives like an opinion, and people who say the true thing plainly because the weather has never given them a reason to be flowery about anything. Oviedo, Asturias. My grandfather drove a taxi. My father was a journalist, which in our house was not a glamorous thing, but an honest one, like being a carpenter who builds with words. My mother was a nurse, and not only a nurse, but the kind who stood up in the union meetings and said what the other nurses were thinking, but were too tired to say. I come from people who tell the truth on purpose and out loud, even when it costs them, and I want you to hold on to that, because everything I am going to tell you depends on it. I became a journalist because it was the family trade, and because I was good at it, which are two different reasons that happened, in my case, to point the same direction. I started young, in the newsrooms of the North, and then I went to Mexico for a while, and then I came back, and I worked my way through the places a serious reporter works through, the wire agency, the newspapers, the early cable channels, until I ended up where I had quietly wanted to end up the whole time, which was in front of a camera at 9 o'clock at night, reading the country its own news. My mother, watching at home in Oviedo, was magnificently unimpressed by all of it. She would telephone after the broadcast to inform me that I had said one word too fast and that my collar was crooked, and I would stand in the studio laughing, because a woman can read a war to a nation at 9 o'clock and still be, at 9:15, a daughter being told she rushed her vowels. People who only know the second half of my life think the camera made me. It did not. The camera found me already finished. By the time the nation knew my face, I had stood at ground zero in New York, with the dust still in the air, and told Spain what a wound that size looks like. I had stood on the coast of Galicia while a broken oil tanker bled black into the sea, and the fishermen wept on the rocks, and I had described it without crying, because my job was to be the steady voice in the storm, and not one more person in it. I had been to Iraq. I had reported a war. I want you to understand that when this story turns, as it is about to, toward palaces and gowns and a man with a famous last name, the woman it turns toward had already seen the actual world, the hard parts of it, and had reported them in a plain, clear voice to millions of people who trusted her to tell them the truth. I had also, by then, been married once already, and it had ended, and I had survived that the way you survive most things, by going to work the next morning. I was not a girl waiting for a story to happen to her. I was a grown woman with a profession and an apartment and a divorce and a future I had built with my own 2 hands. And then a country that thought it already knew everything about its prince was about to find out that it knew nothing about who he would choose. And the country was about to find out at the same moment I did, which is to say, slowly and in secret, and against every probability either of us would have given it. But that comes later. Let me stay for one more moment in the newsroom, because I loved it, and I am not going to pretend I did not. There is a particular feeling 30 seconds before a live broadcast, when the floor manager counts down on his fingers and the whole room goes quiet, and the only thing in the world is the small red light about to come on. I was never more myself than in those 30 seconds. I am terrible at almost everything that is not this. I cannot sit still for a posed photograph to save my life, and I am, by my own admission, the worst loser of car keys in the kingdom of Spain. Calm, clear, ready to say the true thing plainly. I did not know, in those years, that I was training for a different kind of broadcast entirely, one that would last the rest of my life and never cut to commercial. I only knew that I was good at this one, and I was. Ask anyone who watched the news in Spain at the turn of the century. They will tell you. There was a woman who told us what was happening, and we believed her. Her name was Letizia. It still is. Chapter 2. Felipe, the boy they were all watching. I was born already explained. That is the strangest thing about a life like mine, and the hardest one to make a person who was not born into it understand. Most people arrive as a question, and they spend their lives answering it. I arrived as an answer to a question the country had asked before I was born, and I spent my whole childhood being checked against it, the way you check a sum. My father was the king who had brought Spain back from a dark place, and that is a true thing and a heavy thing to be the son of. My mother was a queen from Greece, graceful and exact, who taught me that posture is a kind of language, and that a person who carries themselves well can give a frightened room permission to calm down. I had sisters who loved me and protected me, and also, being older, never once let me forget that the future of the family had inconveniently arrived in the form of their little brother, and I had, from before I can remember, a country watching to see what kind of man the boy would turn out to be. I should say that I rebelled against it, because that would make a better story, but I did not. I was a serious boy. I did my homework. I learned the Constitution the way other boys learned football statistics. I went to the Naval Academy and the Air Academy and the Army Academy because an heir to the throne must be able to stand among his soldiers and not be a tourist. I studied law in Madrid, and then I went across the ocean to Georgetown in Washington, and for a few astonishing years I was something I had never been before and would never be again, which was a young man in a city where most people did not know my face. I have rarely been happier. I would walk to class. I would sit in a lecture hall and be wrong about something, and have a professor correct me and feel the ordinary, magnificent freedom of being just another mind in the room. My sisters found my American seriousness hilarious. They would call from Madrid and ask, with enormous mock concern, whether the Crown Prince had learned yet to make his own toast, and the humbling and honest answer, which I declined to give them the satisfaction of hearing, was that I had burned the toast 3 mornings running that very week. They laughed at me for it across 2 countries and a bad phone line, and they were right to, and I sailed. This is the part people forget. I was an Olympic sailor. I represented Spain at the Barcelona Games in 1992 in a keelboat called a soling on the Mediterranean, with my whole country watching from the shore of a city that was, that summer, the happiest place on earth. I carried the flag into the stadium at the opening ceremony. I will tell you a secret about sailing that turned out to be a secret about the rest of my life. On the water, your title is worth nothing. The wind does not care who your father is. The sea has never once, in the history of the world, been impressed by a crown. You are simply a man and a boat and the weather, and you either read the wind correctly or you do not. And there is something cleansing about that, for a person who spends the rest of his time being treated as a symbol. I think I went looking, without knowing I was looking, for a person who would treat me the way the sea did, as a man and not a meaning, as someone who had to read the wind correctly like everybody else. I did not know that she was, at that very time, learning to read a different kind of wind entirely, in newsrooms in the north, becoming the one person in Spain who would eventually look at the heir to the throne and see, before she saw anything else, a man who needed to be told the truth plainly by someone who was not afraid of him. I was lonely in the particular way that only the overwatched are lonely. Surrounded, scheduled, accounted for, and almost never simply known. I had been on magazine covers as one of Europe's most eligible bachelors, which is a phrase that means a great many people would like to marry your position, and a very small number of them have any idea who you actually are at 11 o'clock at night when the cameras are off and you are tired and you would like, more than anything in the world, for someone to disagree with you about something small. Her name, when I finally learned it, was Letizia. I did not know yet that she would disagree with me about a great many things, large and small, for the rest of my life, and that it would turn out to be the thing that saved me. Chapter 3. Letizia, the dinner, and the man who listened wrong. I met him at a dinner, the way ordinary people meet, which is the detail that nobody believes when I tell it. There was no balcony. There was no destiny in soft focus. There was a table and food going cold the way it does when the conversation is good, and a tall man across from me who had been introduced with a title so heavy it should have made the silverware rattle, and who was, to my genuine surprise, listening. I want to be precise about this, because it is the hinge the whole thing turns on. Men listened to me all the time in those years. I was on television. People leaned toward me at parties with the specific attentiveness of people who are waiting for their turn to tell you that they watch you every night. He did not do that. He asked me a question, and then he did the thing almost nobody with his kind of fame ever does, which is that he listened to the answer all the way through, and then he asked a second question that proved he had actually heard the first answer and not simply waited it out. I tested him. Of course I tested him. I had spent my professional life learning to tell, in under a minute, whether a man across a table was telling me the truth, and I turned that whole apparatus on him at that dinner without mercy. I disagreed with him about something. I do not even remember what, some matter of the day, and I watched to see what he would do. A certain kind of powerful man, when a woman disagrees with him, gets a particular look, a patient, amused, downward look, the look of a man waiting for the weather to clear. He did not get that look. He got interested. He leaned in and argued back, and he was wrong. And when I showed him he was wrong, he did the most disarming thing a man can do, which is that he conceded the point and seemed delighted to have lost it. He laughed, a real laugh, not the practiced kind. And I remember thinking that a man who laughs at himself that easily is either very secure or very foolish, and that I intended, journalist that I am, to find out which. I went home that night and I did not think. I have met the heir to the throne. I thought I have met a man who can be told he is wrong without the table catching fire. In my experience, that was rarer than royalty. Here is the part I can admit now that I could not admit then. I was guarded. I had a profession I had bled for, and I had a marriage behind me that had ended, and I was not a woman who needed a man the way some women are taught to need one. I had built a life with a lock on the door, and the trouble with a man who listens all the way to the end of your sentences is that he is, without doing anything dramatic at all, picking that lock. I did not call anyone and gush. I am not a gusher. I went to work the next morning, and I sat in the makeup chair, and I read the country its news at 9 o'clock that night in a clear, plain voice, and not one of the millions of people watching could have told you that the woman telling them about the world had spent part of her afternoon thinking about a man who asked good second questions. That is the thing about being the steady voice in the storm. You learn to keep your own storms off the air. But I knew. The way you know weather coming off the sea before the sky has changed. Something was on its way toward the coast of my careful, finished, locked-up life. I just did not know yet how much rain it would bring with it, or that at the very end, after all the rain, there would also, finally, be sun. Chapter 4. Felipe, the Broken Coast. The sea I told you about, the one that does not care about crowns, turned black in the autumn of 2002 off the coast of Galicia. A tanker called the Prestige broke apart and bled oil into the water, and the green northern coast I had sailed and loved all my life went slick and dark and dead, and the fishermen stood on the rocks and watched their whole inheritance ruined, and the country needed someone from the family to go and stand with them. That someone was usually me. Here is something why I remember the trip the way I remember it, and it is not for the reason you would guess. I had stood in 100 wounded places by then. It was, God help me, a part of the job I had grown competent at, arriving in the aftermath, being present, letting people see that the country and its institutions had not forgotten them. I knew how to do it. I was good at it the way she was good at the camera, which is to say, it had cost me something to become good at it, and I no longer let the cost show. But on that gray, ruined coast, among the journalists who had come to report the disaster, there was a woman in a white coat with a microphone, telling the country the truth about what had happened to the sea I loved, and she was telling it better than anyone else there. I knew who she was. Everyone knew who she was. But I had met her now, at that dinner, and so I did not see the famous anchor. I saw the woman who had argued with me and won and looked happy about it. And I will tell you the small, foolish, human thing that happened to me on the ruined coast of Galicia, and you can judge me for it if you like. In the middle of a genuine national tragedy, doing my solemn duty among grieving men, I caught myself more than once, hoping she would look over. That is the whole confession. A future king, a serious man on a serious errand, reduced on a black beach to a boy, hoping a girl across the way would glance in his direction. The sea humbles you. I have told you that. It turns out the right woman, standing near the sea, humbles you faster. There is footage of me on that beach, looking grave and statesmanlike. There is no footage of the inside of my head, which was conducting itself with all the dignity of a lovesick teenager, and I have spent 20 years grateful that the cameras cannot film that, because it is genuinely funny, and would have ended my credibility on the spot. I laughed about it later, alone, the helpless laugh of a grown and serious man who has caught himself behaving like a boy of 16. We did not run away together on that beach. Nothing happened that a camera could have caught. But something started, in the way the most important things in a life start, which is quietly, undeniably, and underneath the noise of an entirely different event. I went back to Madrid carrying the image of a woman in a white coat against a gray sky, speaking plainly into the wind about something true, and I think I understood, before I had any right to understand it, that I had spent my whole watched and scheduled and accounted for life waiting for exactly that. Not a princess, not a suitable match from a suitable family, with a suitable smile. A woman who told the truth into the wind, whether or not anyone important was listening. The problem, of course, the problem I could already see from the helicopter on the way home, was every other thing. She was a commoner. She was a divorcee. She was a working journalist whose whole credibility rested on her independence, and I was the single least independent man in Spain, the human centerpiece of an institution that had opinions, loud ones, about who its future king was permitted to love. There had never been a queen of Spain like the one I was beginning to want. Not once. not in all the long, heavy centuries standing invisibly behind me. I am, by training and by temperament, a man who reads the wind before he sets the sail. And every reading I took told me this particular crossing was impossible. I set the sail anyway. It is the only genuinely reckless thing I have ever done, and I have spent 20 years being grateful that I did it. Part 2. Let Me Speak. Chapter 5. Letizia, the most secret thing in Spain. We courted in a country that watches everything, and we did it where nobody could see. And if you want to know how two of the most recognizable people in Spain managed that, the answer is that I was a professional. Not at love, at privacy. A reporter learns very early that the real story is the one nobody has photographed yet, and a reporter who has spent her life on the other side of the lens knows exactly where the lenses are. I knew which restaurants had back rooms. I knew which streets had no good angles. I had spent years studying how the machine of attention worked, and now, for the first time, I turned all of that knowledge to the single purpose of keeping one man a secret. It was, I will admit, the most fun I have ever had while being completely terrified. I once swapped coats with a friend in a restaurant cloakroom, like a woman in a bad spy film, and I stood there in the wrong coat thinking, "You have interviewed presidents, and here you are committing wardrobe espionage over a man." And I had to bite my lip not to laugh out loud at the sheer absurdity of my own life. It was thrilling, and it was exhausting, and it was underneath both of those, terrifying, because I was not a foolish woman, and I could do the arithmetic. I knew what I was, a divorced commoner journalist from the north. I knew what he was. I knew there had never been a queen like the one I would have to become. And I knew that the country, my country, the one I told the news to every night, would have opinions about me that I could do nothing to control, and that for the first time in my professional life, I would be the story instead of the one telling it. That terrified me more than anything. I had built my whole self on being the steady voice describing the storm. I was about to walk into the middle of the storm and become the weather. There was a night, I will not tell you where, when I said all of this to him plainly, because plainly is the only way I know how to say anything. I told him I had a profession I loved, and a name I had earned, and a life with a lock on the door, and that what he was asking, whether he had said it out loud yet or not, was for me to hand all of it over and walk into a building full of strangers and centuries, and learn to be quiet and gracious and ornamental. And I told him I did not think I could be ornamental. I had never once in my life been ornamental. I had been useful, and I had been right, and I had been the steady voice. But ornamental was not in me, and I would not insult either of us by pretending I could fake it. He listened, the way he had listened at the dinner, all the way to the end. And then he said the thing that I married him for, although I did not know yet that I would marry him. The thing I have held on to through 20 years and 2 daughters and a crown, neither of us asked to receive when we did. He said he did not want me to be quiet. He said he had grown up in a world that was already full of quiet, gracious, ornamental people, that he was drowning in them, and that the entire reason he was sitting across from me in a hidden room in a watched city was that I was the first person in his adult life who had told him plainly that he was wrong about something and looked happy doing it. He did not want to fold me into the silence. He wanted me to bring the noise. I would like to report that I believed him completely on the spot. I did not. I am a journalist. I verify. And I was wrong about him, gloriously wrong, in the one direction a skeptic is happy to be wrong. I had been so sure he would disappoint me that, to my own surprise, I kept waiting for a fall that never came. But I filed it away, the way you file a quote you suspect might turn out to be the most important one in the story, And over the months that followed, I checked it against his behavior again and again, the way I had been trained to check everything. And the man kept telling the truth. Do you know how rare that is? I had interviewed presidents. The man kept telling the truth. That was when the lock on my careful door started, quietly, against my own considered professional judgment, to come undone. Chapter 6. Felipe telling them. There is a conversation a man in my position has to have that no romantic film has ever shown you, because it is not romantic, it is institutional, and it is one of the hardest things I have ever done. I had to tell my parents, not in the way an ordinary son tells his parents he has met someone, over coffee, with a photograph on his phone. I had to inform the Crown that its heir intended to marry a divorced commoner journalist, and I had to do it knowing that every advisor and tradition and centuries-old reflex of the institution would line up to explain to me, gently and then less gently, why this could not be. I rehearsed it like a sailor checking his lines before bad weather, and then I went in, and I did not give a careful institutional speech at all. I told my father, the king, that I had found a woman who told me the truth, and that I had spent my whole life surrounded by people who told me what they thought I wanted to hear, and that I had come to believe a king who is only ever told what he wants to hear is a danger to the country he serves. I told him that the most useful thing in my life, the single most useful thing, would be a partner who was not afraid of me. And I told him that I had found her, and that she was a journalist, and that her profession was precisely the reason I needed her, and not in spite of it. It was not an easy conversation. I will not pretend the institution opened its arms. Institutions do not have arms. They have procedures, and the procedures had a great deal to say. I will spare you the full comedy of an ancient institution discovering that its heir intends to marry a divorced journalist. It is enough to report that several very dignified men aged several visible years in a single afternoon, and that I have never, before or since, watched so many people try so hard to faint politely. My father, to his eternal credit, laughed when I finally told him, the first real laugh I had heard from him about the business of the palace in years. But my father had himself married for love, against a certain amount of advice, and my father had also, whatever else history will say about him, brought a frightened country through a dark passage by being willing, at the decisive moment, to do the unscripted thing. He understood me better than the advisors did. He gave me his blessing. The rest of the machine fell into line behind him, the way machines do, grinding and reluctant, and, in the end, obedient. I will share about the night before we announced it, because it is the night I think about most from that whole impossible year. We knew that the next morning her old life would end, not symbolically, actually. She would walk out of her apartment a private professional woman, the steady voice of the 9 o'clock news, and she would never, for the rest of her life, walk anywhere unwatched again. I had been watched since birth. I had no idea any other way to live, and so it did not frighten me. But I was about to hand that life, my strange, airless, watched life, to a woman who had spent 40 years being free, and I lay awake the whole night with the full weight of what I was asking her to give up, and I will confess it, I nearly went to her and told her to run, to keep her name and her newsroom and her unwatched mornings and forget she had ever met me. I did not, because I am selfish, and because I loved her, and because by then I knew the truth, which was that telling Letizia Ortiz to run would have accomplished nothing except to make her stay out of pure contrariness. The woman did not take instructions. It was, I had realized somewhere in that secret year the entire point of her. I could no more have told her what to do than I could have told the wind off Galicia which way to blow. All a sailor can do with a wind like that is trim his sails and hold on and be grateful it chose his boat. Chapter 7. Letizia, let me speak. The morning they announced us, the 1st of November, the country woke up to a sentence it had not seen coming, and so did most of the people inside the palace, and so frankly did I, even though I had known it was coming for weeks. Some things you cannot really know until the cameras turn on. We stood in the gardens of El Pardo in the thin, cold November light, and there were more lenses pointed at me than I had ever in my professional life stood in front of, and I had stood in front of a great many. I knew every one of those photographers' jobs better than they did. That did not make it easier. It made it worse, because I knew exactly what they were hunting for, which was the moment the famous independent newswoman became a soft, silent, suitable fiancée. They asked me a question about how I would adapt to the enormous change in my life, and I began to answer it, because answering questions clearly was the thing I had done each evening at 9 every night for years, the thing I was better at than anyone in that garden. And Felipe, beside me, kind and nervous and trying to help, leaned in to add something, to carry a little of it for me, to do the gracious, princely thing and fill the space. And I turned my head and I said, "Déjame hablar, let me speak." I did not plan it. I want to be completely honest, because plainly is the only way I know how to say anything. And the truth is that the sentence the whole country decided to keep forever was not a calculated act of feminist theater. It was a reflex. It was 40 years of being a woman who finished her own sentences, meeting 1 second of a man trying, with the best intentions in the world, to finish one for me. It came out of me the way the truth comes out of me, which is automatically and a little ahead of my judgment. My mother telephoned within the hour, and I braced for a scolding about telling a future king to be quiet on live television, and instead she said only, "Well, at least you did not mumble it," which is the most Asturian sentence ever spoken and the closest my family has ever come to throwing a parade. The journalist laughed. He laughed too, after a beat, and I have spent 20 years being grateful for that beat and what was in it, because in that beat, a different man, a smaller man, a man more frightened of a country watching, would have been embarrassed, would have stiffened, would have filed it away as the first crack in the new arrangement and set about, slowly, over years, making sure it did not happen again. I have watched that exact thing happen to other women in other palaces. The slow correction, the gradual quieting, the famous voice that gets softer and softer at official functions until one day you realize you have not heard her actually say anything in a decade. He laughed, the good laugh, the laugh of a man who has just been told something true about the rest of his life and has decided to be glad about it instead of afraid. And the country, watching, understood at the very same instant that I did, which was that I had just told the crown prince, in front of everyone, to let me speak, and that he had said yes. He has been saying yes to that sentence for 20 years. People think the famous moment was about me. It was about him. Any woman can say, "Let me speak." The miracle is a man who keeps answering, decade after decade, of course. Go on. I am listening. I am still listening. That was the morning my old life ended and my strange new one began, and I walked into it having served public notice in 2 words that whatever else they were getting in me, they were not getting silence. Chapter 8. Felipe the beat, before I laughed. I should say what happened inside me during the beat. the famous beat, the one between her saying, "Let me speak," and my laugh, because she is right that it was the most important second of that whole public morning, and she does not actually know what was in it, because it happened inside my chest where she could not report from. In that beat, I felt the entire weight of every instinct I had been raised with rise up at once and tell me to be wounded. I had been trained from birth in the choreography of public dignity, and the choreography is very clear about what a man in my position does when a woman corrects him in front of the nation's cameras. He absorbs it smoothly, he covers it with charm, and then, in private, the institution quietly ensures it does not recur. That is the script. I had the script in my hands. For one full second, in the cold garden, I held it. And then I thought about the dinner where she argued with me and won and looked happy. I thought about the Black Coast where she told the truth into the wind. I thought about the night she had told me she could not be ornamental, and I had told her I did not want her to be. And I realized, standing in that garden with the whole country watching, that I was being given a test of whether I had meant it, whether the thing I had said I wanted, a partner who was not afraid of me, was a thing I actually wanted, or merely a thing I had enjoyed saying. So I tore the script up in the privacy of 1 second, and I laughed. And I meant it. The laugh was real. It was the laugh of relief, actually. The relief of a man who has just discovered that the woman he is marrying is exactly who he hoped she was, and is not going to become someone smaller to make the institution comfortable. Every man marrying a strong woman tells himself he wants her strength. Far fewer of them are still glad of it the first time that strength is pointed, in public, at him. I found out in that beat that I was one of the glad ones. It is the proudest I have ever been of myself, and all I did was laugh at the right moment. I will give you the small, true, human footnote, the kind of detail my wife would insist I include because she does not believe in letting me sound nobler than I am. For weeks afterward, my sisters would not let me live it down. Every single time I started to say something at a family dinner, one of them would hold up a hand and say, "Déjame hablar," and the whole table would lose itself laughing, and I would sit there, the man who would be king, being mocked by my own sisters in my own family's dining room, and I would think, with a happiness I could not have explained to any of my advisors, that this was the life I wanted, to be loved enough to be teased, to have married a woman whose 2 words had become a joke. My own family used to keep me humble. A crown does a great many things to a man. It does not, on its own, keep him human. For that, it turns out, you need a wife who will tell you, in front of the nation, to let her speak, and 3 sisters who will never, ever let you forget that she did. Part 3. The Rain. Chapter 9. Letizia, the last broadcast. I had to read the news one last time. That is a detail people forget, if they ever knew it. There was a final night, a final 9 o'clock, a final time the floor manager counted down on his fingers, and the red light came on, and I told my country what had happened in the world that day. And then it was over, the thing I had built my whole self out of, and I walked off the set and out of the building and into a life where I would never again be the steady voice describing the storm, because I had become the storm, exactly as I had feared. I did not cry on the air. I want you to know that. 20 years of training held, and the woman who told Spain its news told it cleanly and clearly right to the final word, and not one of the millions of people watching could have known that the anchor reading them the headlines was reading them for the last time and grieving the only professional self she had ever had. I saved the crying for the car. That is the discipline. You keep your storms off the air. I had one more broadcast in me, and I gave the country a clean one. And then I sat in the back of a car in the dark, and I let myself, for about 4 minutes, mourn the woman I had spent 40 years becoming, because I was about to set her down, and I knew it. The crew had given me a card on that last night, signed by all of them, and someone had drawn a small crown on it with a cartoon arrow pointing at my head, and the words, "Try not to boss them around too much." And I laughed so hard in that dark car, in the same 4 minutes I was crying, that I genuinely frightened the driver. People assume the hard part of marrying a prince is the gowns, the protocol, the learning which fork. The forks were nothing. I learned the forks in an afternoon. The hard part, the part nobody warns you about, is the morning you wake up and your name is no longer attached to your work. I had been Letizia Ortiz, journalist, a woman who was somebody because of what she did. I was about to become Letizia, Princess of Asturias, a woman who was somebody because of whom she had married, to a person who had earned her own name with her own voice in her own newsroom. That exchange was not a fairy tale. It was an amputation, and I went into it with my eyes open because I had checked the man against his behavior for a year, and the man kept telling the truth, and I had decided, with the full, clear, cold judgment of a professional skeptic, that he was worth the amputation. I will say the thing I did that nobody saw, the small private ceremony of it. The night before the wedding, alone, I took out the credential, the press credential, the laminated card that said I was a working journalist, and I held it for a while, and then I put it somewhere safe. I did not throw it away. I have never thrown it away, because I understood, even then, that I was not going to stop being a reporter. I was only going to stop being paid for it. The eye does not retire. The instinct to watch carefully and ask the hard question and verify the comfortable answer, that does not turn off because you have married into a palace. If anything, the palace needed it more than the newsroom ever had. I was bringing my profession with me through the cathedral door. I just was not going to tell them that yet. Chapter 10. Felipe. The morning it would not stop raining. It rained on our wedding day. I do not mean a romantic mist. I mean Madrid, on the 22nd of May, in 2004, before the entire world and 36 royal houses and 1 million people in the streets decided to deliver the kind of gray, relentless northern rain that I had always associated with her coast and not with my city. I stood at a window in the palace that morning in the half-light, dressed in a uniform that weighed as much as a small child, watching the water come down on the most important and most public day of my life. And I want you to know the disreputable thought I had, the one I have never said in an official setting. I thought, of course it is raining. The sea humbles you, and now the sky is going to humble us both, in front of everyone, on the one day we were supposed to be allowed to look like the fairy tale. A member of my staff, watching the downpour beside me, offered the genuinely useless consolation that rain on a wedding day is good luck, and I told him that at the rate it was coming down, we were going to be the single luckiest couple in the history of Europe, and the two of us laughed the grim little laugh of men in heavy uniforms, watching a careful plan drown. There is a tradition that a Spanish royal bride walks a certain route. She was supposed to walk part of it. The rain made that impossible, and so she came to the Almudena Cathedral in a car, a Rolls-Royce, arriving at 12 minutes past 11 in the morning through a curtain of water, and I have thought many times since about the symbolism of it, which neither of us arranged, and neither of us could have prevented. The plan was that she would walk. The weather said she would not. And so the most famous independent woman in Spain arrived at her own wedding, having already been forced by something entirely outside her control to do it differently than she had intended. If you wanted a parable for what marrying into an institution does to a free person, you could not have written a better one than the rain wrote for us that morning for free. I waited for her inside. A cathedral is very large and very quiet and very old, and a man waiting in one for the woman he is about to marry has nothing to do but stand inside the enormous weight of the thing he is doing. I thought about my father and my grandfather and the long line of men behind me who had stood more or less where I was standing and waited for more or less suitable women chosen for more or less strategic reasons. And I thought about the fact that I was on the verge of marrying a divorced journalist from Oviedo, whom I had chosen for the entirely unstrategic reason that she told me the truth and made me laugh and was not afraid of me. And I felt, standing in the oldest and heaviest building of my whole heavy inherited life, completely and recklessly free. The institution had its cathedral. I had my reason for being in it. They were not the same thing, and I knew it, and the knowing made me happy. And then she came in out of the rain, in a gown by Perdigaz with a collar that stood up around her, like the prow of a ship, and she walked toward me down the long aisle of the most watched cathedral in the world. And I forgot the rain and the weight of the uniform, and the 36 royal houses, and the million people in the wet streets, and the whole grinding, obedient machine of the thing we were doing. I just watched her come, the steady voice, the woman who told the truth into the wind, walking toward me on purpose, out of the rain. I have been told I was supposed to look solemn. It is a sacred and serious occasion, a royal wedding, and there is footage of me, I am sure, looking appropriately grave. But here is the truth, that what I felt, watching her come up that aisle, was not gravity. It was the specific, helpless grin of a man who cannot believe his luck and has given up trying to hide it. I had read every wind. Every reading said impossible. And here she came anyway, down the aisle, through the rain, to me. Chapter 11. Letizia. What I promised and what I did not. Here is something about the vows, because there is a thing about that day that I have never quite been able to make people understand, and it has to do with the difference between the promise the cathedral asked me to make and the promise I actually made. The cathedral, the institution, the centuries, all of them wanted a certain promise from me. They wanted the promise that the famous independent newswoman would dissolve gracefully and completely into the role. They had a shape ready for me, a queen-shaped space worn smooth by all the suitable silent women who had filled it before, and the day was, from the institution's point of view, the day I agreed to be poured into that shape and hardened there. That is not the promise I made. I stood in front of God and the country and the man, and I promised him. Not the role, him. I promised the man who had listened to the end of my sentences, the man who had laughed the right laugh at the right beat, the man who had told me he did not want me to be ornamental, and had then spent a year proving it with his behavior, which is the only proof a reporter trusts. I married a person. The country thought it was watching a woman marry an institution. I knew I was marrying a man who happened to be standing inside one, and I had made my peace with the institution as the price of the man, the way you make your peace with the rain as the price of the coast. Here is the small human thing from inside the cathedral, the one my husband loves to tell, and tells worse than I do. At the most solemn possible moment, with the whole world watching, and the centuries pressing down and the incense rising, he leaned over, my brand new husband, and he whispered something to me. People have wondered for 20 years what the heir to the throne whispered to his bride at the altar of the Almudena. I should tell you. He whispered, "You can speak now if you want. Déjame hablar." He gave it back to me at the altar, the joke, our joke, the two words that had already become the truest thing about us. And I had to bite the inside of my cheek so hard not to laugh that I have a small scar there to this day, a private souvenir of the morning I married a man who could make me laugh at my own wedding inside the holiest building in Spain. That is the man I promised, not the crown. The man who whispered a joke to me at the altar to keep me from disappearing into the solemnity. I made one private promise that day that was only mine, that I told no one, not even him until years later. I promised that I would not let them quiet me, that whatever else I gave up, the gown and the name and the newsroom and the unwatched mornings, I would keep the voice, not for me, for the role itself, and for whatever good a person standing in that strange high place could do with a voice that still worked. I had spent my life believing that the most useful thing in the world is a clear voice telling the truth plainly. I would not stop believing it just because I had changed buildings. I have kept that promise. It has cost me here and there, the way keeping any real promise costs you. But I have kept it. The woman who walked out of that cathedral was a princess and would one day be a queen, and she was also, underneath the gown, still the woman from Oviedo whose grandfather drove a taxi and whose mother stood up in the union meetings and said the true thing plainly. They did not get my silence. They never have. Chapter 12. Felipe, the son, at the last possible moment. It rained the whole ceremony. It rained while we said the words, and it rained while we signed the registers, and it rained, I was certain, out of some ancient meteorological commitment to making sure our perfect public day was a damp gray one, and I had privately surrendered to it. Fine, I thought. We are married. The rain can do as it likes. The important thing happened inside, dry, in front of God, and the weather missed it. And then we came out, and we crossed to the royal palace, and the tradition is that the newly married couple goes out onto the balcony over the Plaza de Oriente to greet the people, the actual people, the hundreds of thousands of them who have stood in the streets, in this case in the rain, all day to be there. We stepped out onto that balcony, the two of us married now, into a plaza full of a wet and patient and roaring crowd. And as we stood there, at what felt like the very last possible moment the day had left to give us anything, after hours and hours of gray, relentless water, the clouds over Madrid broke, and the sun came through, and it fell on the plaza, and on the wet, upturned faces, and on the two of us standing on that balcony, and the whole crowd made a sound I have never forgotten and never expect to hear again. Somebody down in the plaza shouted a joke up at us about the weather finally behaving itself, and Letizia laughed out loud on the balcony in the new sun, in front of the whole roaring city, and I thought, there it is. There is the sound I am marrying. I am not a superstitious man. I am a sailor and a lawyer and a constitutional monarch, three professions that do not encourage a man toward omens. But I stood on that balcony with the sun coming out at the last possible moment over my brand new wife, and I thought clearly in words, that is us. That is the whole thing. You stand in the gray for as long as it takes. You do not leave the balcony. You do not go back inside out of the rain. You keep standing there together in front of everyone getting wet. And if you are faithful to the standing, the sun comes. Maybe not when you wanted it. Maybe at the very last possible moment, after you have given up expecting it. but if you stay out on the balcony together, it comes. I have thought about that balcony in every hard season of the 20 years since, and there have been hard seasons, because there is no marriage without them, and certainly no marriage conducted in front of an entire nation without them. Whenever the gray has gone on too long, whenever the weather of a public life has worn at us, I have thought about the simple instruction the sky gave us on our wedding day. For free, in front of everyone. Stay on the balcony. Do not go back inside. The sun is coming. It is only late. She slipped her hand into mine up there, in the sun, in view of the roaring, wet crowd. I did not plan it, and neither did she, and no protocol officer arranged it. Her hand just found mine, the way it has found mine on 1,000 balconies and stages and gray mornings since. And I held it, and I thought, with the specific astonished gratitude of someone who read every wind and was told impossible and married her anyway, of all the things I will ever be given to hold, this hand, this one, is the one I will not let the institution have. They can have the rest. The hand is mine. Part 4. The Years and the Crown. Chapter 13. Letizia, the girl who will be queen. Our older daughter was born on the last day of October in 2005, and we named her Leonor, and the country celebrated, and somewhere in a government office, the long, quiet machinery of succession registered that a future queen of Spain had arrived, and I lay in a hospital bed holding her, and understood, with the specific clarity that arrives at 2 a.m. with a newborn on your chest, that I had not only had a daughter, I had had a colleague, a successor, a small person who would one day stand exactly where her father stands, carrying exactly the weight he carries, watched exactly the way he has been watched since birth. Most mothers worry about the ordinary, enormous things. Will she be healthy? Will she be kind? Will the world be gentle with her? I worried about all of those. And then I worried about one more that almost no mother in the world has ever had to worry about, which is, how do you raise a free person to do a job that is the opposite of free? How do you give a child a real self, a private interior, an actual personality, when you know that from the day she is old enough to walk, she will be a public figure, studied, photographed, discussed, and measured against a role that was carved before she was born? I had given up my own free self at the cathedral door, with my eyes open, as a grown woman who had already had 40 years of freedom to draw on. My daughter would never get the 40 years. She would be public from the cradle. I decided in that hospital bed on the thing I would spend the next 20 years doing, the thing I have maybe done better than anything else I have done in this strange high life. I decided that I would be the keeper of my daughter's ordinary, that whatever else the institution took, it would not get their childhoods. Inside our own walls, they would be 2 girls who fought over the bathroom and lost their socks and did their homework badly and were told to sit up straight at dinner by a mother from Oviedo who did not care in the slightest that one of them would someday be queen, because right now, tonight, she had not cleared her plate. Leonor, I should report for the historical record, was a terrible sleeper and an even worse negotiator, and there is nothing in the entire apparatus of the Spanish state that prepares a woman to be out-argued at 2 a.m. by a person who cannot yet form words. And yet there I was, a future queen, losing nightly, and laughing about it by daylight, to a small tyrant in a crib. I would give them, by main force if necessary, the thing I had given up, a place where they were just people, a house with a real kitchen table, with oatmeal and a spilled coffee mug, and a school drop-off, and a forever lost sock, and the pajamas nobody could find at bedtime, a house where nobody was watching. I have a memory I keep like a photograph. Leonore, small, maybe 4, standing in a doorway in her pajamas long after she was supposed to be asleep, having come to find me to report, with the total seriousness of a small child delivering breaking news, that her sister was not asleep either, and that this was, in her view, a scandal. And I crouched down and listened to her report all the way to the end, the way her father had once listened to me at a dinner, and I thought, good. Tell me what you see. Tell it plainly. You come from people who say the true thing out loud, on both sides now, the journalists and the union nurses on mine, and the long-watched line of public servants on his, and underneath all the centuries you are mine, and you have a voice. And I am going to spend my whole life making sure that nobody, no institution, no century, no role ever teaches you to stop using it. She will be a good queen. I know it the way I used to know weather coming off the sea. But that is decades of her own to live first. And in the meantime, she is my daughter, and she still, even now, comes to find me to report things. And I still listen to the end. Chapter 14. Felipe, the kingdom of a house with 2 girls. Our second daughter, Sophia, was born in the spring of 2007, and with her arrival I became something the history books do not have a good word for, which is the only man in a house full of women, 3 of them, all of whom were smarter than me about the things that actually run a household, and none of whom were the least bit impressed by my title. I want to talk about the unroyal part of my life, because it is the part that kept me sane, and the part that nobody puts in the official portraits. I am, in the world's eyes, the King of Spain, the head of state, the man on the coins. In my own kitchen I am outvoted 3-1 on every question of consequence, and I have been for the better part of 2 decades, and I would not trade it for any amount of deference the wider world could offer me. We are, behind the gates, a family of the kitchen counter and the laundry basket and the matching pajamas, a family that has dropped the groceries on the front porch and forgotten the umbrella at the supermarket like everybody else. There is a particular sound a man makes, a particular defeated, good-humored sound, when he offers an opinion about something domestic and is calmly corrected by his wife, and then, devastatingly, by both of his daughters in succession, and I have made that sound several thousand times, and each time I have thought, this is the cure. This is the thing that keeps the crown from going to my head. A house where I am the least authoritative person present. I have already confessed that the sea does not care about crowns. I will confess now that neither do daughters. There is no faster route back to ordinary humanity for a head of state than a teenage daughter who needs a ride and is unimpressed by the schedule of state. I have, over the years, burnt the toast, defeated myself with the dishwasher, spilled the coffee across a state document, and sent a daughter to school in one matching sock and one mismatched sock, and been corrected, gently and unanimously, every single time. I have stood in rooms with presidents and prime ministers and felt the full strange weight of what I represent. And then I have come home and been told, with total filial indifference to my constitutional role, that I was not, under any circumstances, to embarrass anyone by dancing at a family party. They were too late with that instruction, but I appreciated the attempt. And here is the running confession of my whole life, the thing my Olympic sailing should have prevented, and somehow did not. I cannot dance. I can navigate a soling keelboat across an Olympic course reading wind I cannot see. I can stand in front of a nation and give the speech that holds the country steady on its hardest night. I cannot, to save the actual monarchy, move my feet to music in a way that does not make my wife and daughters laugh until they cannot breathe. It has become the great recurring entertainment of our private life. The man can do almost anything the role requires. He cannot dance, and the three of them never ever let me forget it, the same way my sisters never let me forget Déjà me hablar. And I have come to understand that being teased relentlessly by the women you love is not the opposite of being respected. It is what respect looks like when it has decided to stay for 20 years and get comfortable and put its feet up. The world bows to me. My family teases me. Only one of those keeps a man whole. I think often about how close I came to a different life, a suitable wife, a correct and silent and ornamental queen, a house full of the gracious quiet I grew up drowning in. I would have been, in that life, a perfectly adequate king and a profoundly lonely man, and I would never have known what I was missing, because you cannot miss a kitchen full of women laughing at you if you have never once stood in one. I read the wind wrong about a great many things in my life. I read it exactly right about her. It is the one crossing I am proud of. Chapter 15. Letizia, the year it almost won. I have made this all sound like a series of well-lit victories, the joke at the altar and the sun on the balcony and the kitchen full of laughing women. And I owe you the truth, because plainly is the only way I know how to say anything. And the truth is that there was a stretch in the middle of all of it when the life very nearly took us apart. And it did not do it with a scandal or a betrayal or any of the dramatic things a person braces for. It did it the way the sea took the Galician coast, slowly, a little at a time, a thin black film over everything, until one morning you look up and the thing you loved is barely recognizable under the weight of what has settled on it. Here is what nobody tells you about a marriage conducted entirely in public. The watching never stops, and the watching is not neutral. Every choice I made was a referendum. The clothes I wore were a national conversation. My face at an official function was studied for what it might mean. I had spent the career on the other side of the lens, and I knew exactly, with professional precision, how the machine of attention strips a human being down into a set of theories about her. And now I was inside the machine, and so was my marriage. And there is a particular loneliness in fighting with your husband about something ordinary, and knowing that even your argument is not entirely your own, because some version of it will be guessed at and printed and discussed by people who have decided who you are. There is a particular comedy, the bleak kind, in reading a confident magazine analysis of an argument you had with your husband about whose turn it was to deal with the dishwasher, written by someone who was not in the kitchen and has decided on no evidence whatsoever that the dishwasher was a metaphor. It was not a metaphor. It was a dishwasher. We are as ordinary as that, underneath the gold. There was a season, and I will not put a year on it because the year is not the point, when I felt myself starting to disappear under it. Not the dramatic disappearance, the quiet one, the one where you stop saying the true thing plainly because you are tired of watching the true thing get twisted, and you start, just to survive, to go a little silent, a little smooth, a little ornamental, the exact thing I had promised in the cathedral I would never become. I felt the queen-shaped space the institution had made for me starting, finally, after years of my resistance, to win. And the worst part, the part I can only say now, is that I was too tired to fight it. And a marriage where one person is going quietly silent is a marriage with the air leaking out of it. And Felipe felt it, and neither of us knew how to say so, because we had gotten so practiced at not saying the hard things where the watchers could hear. We almost let it happen. That is the confession of this chapter. two people who genuinely loved each other almost let the sheer grinding weight of a watched life wear them down into a polite, functional, hollowed-out version of a marriage, the kind that holds up fine in the official photographs and has died on the inside. And there are a great many of those in the high places of the world. And for one bad stretch, we were closer to becoming one of them than I have ever admitted out loud. What saved us was the balcony. I mean it almost literally. There was a night, a low gray night, when I finally said the truth, plainly the way I had been raised to, the way I had stopped doing. And I told him I was disappearing, and I was frightened, and I did not want to become the silent queen. And he did the thing he has done since the dinner, since the beginning, the only thing that has ever actually worked on me. He listened right to the end, and then he said, "Déjame hablar," except he said it to give the words back to me, the way he had at the altar. He said, "No, you speak, you have stopped speaking, and I have missed it, and I did not marry you to watch you disappear. So speak." I am still listening. I am always still listening. And I remembered the sky on our wedding day, the instruction it gave us for free. Stay on the balcony. Do not go back inside out of the rain. The sun is only late. We stayed on the balcony. We are still on it. But I will not pretend we did not, for one bad season, very nearly go back inside. Chapter 16. Felipe, the day the box was heavy. My father abdicated in June of 2014, and on the 19th of that month, I became King Felipe VI, and I will share about that day honestly, because the official version is about continuity and ceremony and the smooth transfer of a constitutional role, and the true version, the one that happened inside my chest, is about a son taking something very heavy from his father's hands and trying not to let his own arms shake. I had been raised my whole life for that exact day, and you would think a man prepared from birth would feel ready when it finally came, and you would be wrong. Nothing prepares you for the actual wait. For 46 years I had been the heir, the one who waited, the answer to a question not yet asked. And then in a single morning, the waiting ended, and the question was asked, and the answer was me. And I felt the full weight of a country, and its history, and its hopes, and its considerable troubles settle onto my shoulders all at once, and I can admit that I have rarely in my life been more frightened, and let me be plain, the only thing that made it bearable. She was there. Not as a decoration beside me in the photographs, although she was that too, and the country saw a queen. I knew her as the one person in the building who would tell me the truth about how I was doing the job. Every other person around a new king has a reason to flatter him. The advisors, the officials, the long, obedient machine, all of them have an interest in telling the king he is splendid. I had exactly one person in my life whose entire character, formed in a newsroom in the north by a journalist father and a union nurse mother, made her constitutionally incapable of telling me a comfortable lie. On the day I became king, that was not a marital nicety. That was a matter of state. A king who is only ever flattered becomes a danger to his people. I had married 20 years before I needed her to be, the one person who would never flatter me. And on the heaviest day of my life, I understood that the reckless, impossible crossing I had made as a young man in love had also, without my planning it, been the single most important constitutional decision I would ever make. That night, after the ceremony, after the weight had been formally and publicly transferred, and the country had a new king, and the cameras had finally gone, I sat with her, and I never feel like a king. I felt like a tired man who had carried something heavy and was not sure he had carried it well. and I asked her plainly, because she has taught me over the years to say the hard things plainly, whether I had done it right. And she did not flatter me. She told me the truth, the small, specific, true things, what had been good and what had wobbled, and what I would need to be better at tomorrow. And it was the most comforting conversation of my entire life, because it was real, because it came from the one person who would not lie to me. And a frightened new king does not need to be told he was splendid. He needs to be told the truth by someone who is on his side. I will give you the one absurd detail of the most solemn morning of my life. The day I became King of Spain, I could not find the correct cufflinks, and I stood in my own dressing room, a head of state running late for his own accession, while my wife located them in roughly 4 seconds in a drawer I had already searched twice, and said not unkindly that the monarchy appeared to be safe, but that my powers of observation were in serious trouble. I laughed. It was the first time I laughed all day, and I needed it more than the crown. I had both in one woman. I have had both in one woman for 20 years. They do not put that in the Constitution, but they should. Chapter 17. Letizia, the reporter who became a queen. When I became Queen of Spain, the commentators reached for the fairy tale word, the transformation word, the journalist becomes queen headline, as if I had been turned into something else by a wand. I want to correct the record, the way I used to correct it for a living. I did not become something else. I brought the reporter into the palace, and I never let her retire. Everything useful I have done in this strange high role, I have done because I am still, under the title, the woman who stood at ground zero and on the black Galician coast and learned that the most valuable thing in the world is a clear voice telling the truth about what it actually sees. I learned, in the years of becoming, what a person standing in this high place can do with a kept voice. I went to the places the cameras do not naturally go, the rooms where people are sick and frightened and forgotten, and I used the one thing a queen has that a reporter does not, which is the power to make the country look at whatever she chooses to look at. I have spent that power on the things my mother, the union nurse, would have wanted me to spend it on. The people nobody is reporting, the illnesses nobody wants to discuss at dinner, the children who do not eat well, the families crushed by diseases too rare to make the news, the ordinary, unphotographed suffering that a country prefers not to see. A reporter shows the country what it would rather not look at. So does a good queen. The job changed buildings. It did not change. I will say a small thing I do that drives the protocol people to a quiet despair, and that I will never stop doing. I rewear my clothes. The same dress, the same coat, again and again, facing the cameras that are counting. They would prefer a queen who appears each time in something new, gleaming, expensive, suitable. And I think of my grandfather, the taxi driver, and my mother in the union meetings, and the whole green, plain-spoken North that made me, and I wear the coat again, on purpose, because I am still, under the crown, a woman from Oviedo who cannot, to my embarrassment, walk past a sensible, re-wearable coat, a woman who knows the value of a thing and will not pretend otherwise to please an institution. A protocol officer once gently suggested I might vary the wardrobe more, and I laughed and asked him whether the Republic was going to fall over a re-worn coat, and he had no answer, and that coat and I have appeared together many proud times since. It is a very small rebellion. It is the same rebellion as Déjame Hablar. It is me telling the watching country plainly that they got a real person with real values from a real place, and that no amount of gold thread was ever going to change what I am made of. People ask me sometimes, carefully, whether I regret it. The newsroom, the name I gave up at the cathedral door, the free, unwatched life I set down with my eyes open. And I tell them the truth, because it is the only thing I know how to tell. I do not regret it. I grieved it once, in the back of a car in the dark, for about 4 minutes, and then I went and built something else, something I could not have imagined from inside the newsroom, a life where the voice I spent 40 years sharpening gets pointed now at the suffering of strangers and occasionally, still, at my husband when he is wrong. The credential is still in the drawer. I still take it out sometimes, not because I want the old life back, because I want to remember that the woman holding it and the woman wearing the crown are the same woman, and that I kept my promise. They never got my silence. Chapter 18. Felipe, the dance at last. I told you I cannot dance, and I want to end on the truth of it, because there is a version of the not dancing that is just a running joke my family loves, and there is a deeper version that is the whole point of everything I have been trying to tell you, and I have saved it for last. There was a night, not long ago, a private one, no cameras, the end of some long family occasion. The girls grown now and rolling their eyes at us the way they have rolled their eyes at us their whole lives. Music was playing, and my wife, the Queen of Spain, the woman who told a future king to let her speak out before the whole country 20-some years ago, looked across the room at me, the man who has been head of state, an Olympic sailor, and the answer to a question asked before he was born, and who cannot, to save the actual monarchy, move his feet to music. And she held out her hand, and I need you to understand what that hand has meant for 20 years. It is the hand that found mine on the balcony in the sun on our wedding day, when the clouds broke at the last possible moment over a wet, roaring crowd. It is the hand that I decided, that day, the institution would never get to have. And across a room, late at night, with our daughters watching, and no country watching at all, she held it out, and she was asking the man who cannot dance to dance with her anyway. So I danced, badly. Exactly as badly as my whole family has always promised the country I would, if the country ever found out. We were in our bathrobes, if you want the truth of it, 2 people in matching robes at the end of a long day, the King and Queen of Spain looking like any couple who has lost the sock and burnt the toast and stayed anyway. I danced with the Queen of Spain in a quiet room, terribly, my feet doing the wrong things, and she laughed. And I laughed, and our daughters laughed, and I held her hand, and I did the thing I cannot do because she asked me to. And it was, I think, the truest moment of my entire life, truer than the crown, truer than the cathedral, truer than the Olympic course, or the flag or the speeches that held the country steady. Because that is the whole thing, in the end. That is the marriage. You stay on the balcony in the gray until the sun comes. You give the words back to each other when one of you starts to disappear. You marry the one person who will not flatter you, and you spend a life being told the truth by someone who is on your side. And when she holds out her hand and asks you to do the one thing in the world you cannot do, you take it, and you do it badly. And you are grateful clear to the bottom of your reluctant, unrhythmic soul that she asked. She told me once, a long time ago, in a cold garden before the whole country, to let her speak. I have spent 20 years saying yes, of course. Go on, I am listening. And every single time, after she has said the true thing out loud, the way she was raised to, the way she has never once stopped doing, she holds out her hand, and I take it, I will always take it. It is the one wind I read correctly. It is the one crossing I am proud of. It is, of everything I have ever been given to hold, the only thing I have never once wanted to set down. Epilogue. Letizia, what lasts? People want to know the secret when a marriage lasts in plain sight for as long as ours has, and they want it to be a complicated secret, a strategy, a technique, something they can write down. It is not complicated. It is 2 words and a man who keeps answering them. I said once, "Let me speak." And the miracle was never that I said it. Any woman can say it. The miracle, the whole miracle, the thing I have built a life on, is a man who said yes and meant it and kept meaning it through 20 years and 2 daughters and a crown that landed on us before we were ready, and a watched life that very nearly wore us both down to nothing, and 100 gray mornings when it would have been so much easier to go quietly silent. He kept saying yes. Go on. I am listening. I am still listening. That is the secret. Find the person who will not flatter you, and will not silence you, and will not let you disappear. And then, for the rest of your life, when they say, "Let me speak," say yes. Say it on the good days. Say it on the gray ones. Say it especially on the gray ones. Stay on the balcony. The sun is only late. I am still the woman from Oviedo whose grandfather drove a taxi. He is still the man who cannot dance, who burns the toast and loses at the dishwasher, and once put the coffee mug in the laundry. He is still the man who cannot dance. We are still, after everything, the 2 people who met at a dinner where one of them listened to the very end. The crown is a heavy and complicated thing, and we carry it as well as we can for a country we both love. But the crown is not the love story. The love story is the listening. It always was. Love is hard. Love is worth it. Love stays. If you have, in the last 2 hours, been reminded of somebody, a parent, a partner, a sibling, a friend, a person who listens to you straight to the end of your sentences, call them, text them, write the small note, tell them you have something to say, and then, when they say, "Go on," say what was true, plainly, the way you have always known how. The story you have just listened to is the story of 2 people who met because one of them listened right to the end, and who stayed together because one of them kept saying, "For 20 years, of course, go on, I am listening." The story of your life is the story of who listens to you and who you listen to in the next 10 minutes. Thank you for the 2 hours. We will see you on the next one. Books by Barron, Love Stories Series. Author's Note. This book is inspired by publicly available material about real people and is built with respect from the public record of 2 people who have lived most of their lives in view of their country. King Felipe VI and Queen Letizia are real people. The public anchors of this story are drawn from the public record, and the interior thoughts and private scenes are dramatized interpretation, not invented events. The things they said in public, they said. The things imagined here, the kitchen table things and the altar whispers and the late-night dances, were imagined with care to honor the truth of who these 2 people have shown themselves to be. And nothing cruel or scandalous, nothing private to their children, was invented to fill a quiet place. Where the record was silent, this book stayed silent too. To King Felipe and Queen Letizia, who did not ask for this book and owe it nothing, thank you for a love story that has shown a watching country for more than 20 years that 2 people from 2 impossibly different worlds can choose each other on purpose and keep choosing and stay on the balcony until the sun comes.